Hi, everybody.
Yeah, hi, good morning, everybody. Um, so we're going over the Addendum A today. We're trying to do this once a month as an extension of Accelerator. So ideally, if you had done Accelerator this month, where we're going over contracts, the buyer agency form, the offer to purchase, then coming to this contract training the following Monday, or in this case, the Monday after that, we'll hit up the Addendum A. So I'm going to share my screen here, making sure that I pull up an Addendum A here. And Joan and I have both now taught the Addendum A in this contract training space. And I'm going to acknowledge it's a lot to get through. So we have shortened it, actually per Kathleen's kind of how she does it in Accelerator. So we won't be going it over this section by section, and that's for everybody's benefit. But now I need to get over here. Let's see how this looks. Um, so I know Dennis and I know Elizabeth are not newbies. Isaiah and Ashley, were you guys in Accelerator?
Yes, I was last week.
You were awesome. Okay.
No, I wasn't. I'm new to Keller. So
You are new to
yeah.
Keller. Okay. Um, sorry, thanks for your patience while I get this. Okay, can everyone see the addendum A up here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Um, all right, so the addendum A again is an accompaniment to your offer to purchase. So whenever you go to draft an offer, you will also include the addendum A. Um, it is exactly that, an addendum, so it's additional provisions to the offer. There are different versions of the addendum A out there. The WRA has their own. We use the GMAR drafted addendum A, so that's our local association, the Greater Milwaukee Association of Realtors. Um, and what I want you guys to hear first is, and this is a common question that Joan and I get, is what happens if I'm not using some of these provisions, like or contingencies, that are spelled out on the addendum A? Do I need to use it? And the answer is yes. There are a lot of provisions buried, that are just crash printed here, that may or may not apply to your transaction. But if it happens to apply to your transaction and this was not included, we could be in hot water with our buyer. This is mostly a protective piece for our buyers. So you're always going to be using this with your offers. I want to get to my kind of my talking points here. So first up, I don't know if that's gonna work. That's okay. So beginning at the very top, you're going to be including in your buyer's information and the property address, of course. And then the first major provision that this covers is a seller contribution. So if your buyer is requesting a loan cost or loan closing cost credit, or AKA a seller's contribution, they would use line 7 here, and you would put in a X here if it was applicable. I'm using a old version here. And just in practice, you would find out what the maximum amount of seller contributions that a buyer can ask for from that lender. So you cannot, there is a cap on how much you can ask for in terms of closing cost credits. And you would have to get that information again from the lender. I would say that more often than not, a seller contribution is not being added in an offer to purchase until you get to the stage of negotiating an inspection, where one of the ways that a repair could be covered, or, you know, instead of a seller just going ahead and making a repair, hiring a contractor to fix that plumbing leak, a buyer could potentially just ask for money up front to take care of it themselves at closing. So that's more often than not where we're seeing a seller contribution come into play. Next up is the home warranty program. So if there is a home warranty offered as a part of the offer to purchase, or as a part of the listing, excuse me, you would indicate it here on line 10. Even if it's not being offered, and the buyer was presented with the option of a home warranty, and they want to ask the seller for one, you would include it here as well. So you would indicate what the cost is here on line 11. You would indicate who is paying for it and who is ordering it. So the warranty would be paid by the seller or the buyer. If you're asking the seller to cover it, you would be striking the word buyer. And then you're also mapping out who's ordering it, which would be either the listing agent or the selling agent. Sometimes selling agents will take care of ordering that home warranty program. But this is where you would address that. Again, I would say in practice, we kind of see this coming up and negotiated after an inspection happens. So maybe it's discovered there are older mechanicals that, you know, they're not necessarily defective, but for peace of mind, maybe that buyer wants to ask the seller to kick in a home warranty at this point in case something happens to that furnace, in this example, after closing. So that's another just kind of idea for you in terms of negotiating inspections, that home warranty coverage can be a negotiation point or an idea to use. Line 15, the association fee. If the home is part of a homeowners association, you would put that fee in here on line 15. And that could be a subdivision, homeowners association, or a condo association. Then kind of the meat and potatoes of the addendum A would be the testing contingencies and the well inspection contingencies, as well as the private sanitary system inspection contingency. So more often than not, when you think of the addendum A, you're thinking of these contingencies. This is where you would put them versus the regular offer to purchase, as they are not included there. So we've got our general testing contingency. We've got our well water testing contingency. We've got our well system inspection contingency. And then we've got, again, our sanitary system inspection contingency down here. They are all pretty much mapped out the same way, except for the general testing contingency. In that, a buyer is asking for the seller to provide a report. And it's kind of in the reverse in that the deadline is backdated from a closing date. So in the terms of this, the seller is to provide a report with test results and inspection results no later than 15 days prior to closing. And again, typically it's the buyer asking for the seller to pay for. But in this climate, I mean, we've actually seen it a number of ways where a seller, or excuse me, where a buyer will say, we'll take on the costs of conducting these tests. So just kind of wanted you to be aware of that. Jumping back to the testing contingency, this general testing contingency, oftentimes the general testing contingency is coupled with the inspection contingency. And in here, in these lines, you are specifying what you want what the buyer wants to see tested. So often it's mold, asbestos, air quality is one that I see. But what I want you guys to have an understanding here is that you do need to be specific in what kinds of tests the buyer wants to see done. And oftentimes they'll say, I don't know if I want all of these tested per se, but if it comes up, I want to have the ability. So you can communicate to a seller, we want mold, asbestos, or air quality testing done if recommended by inspector.
Steph, I just received an offer with that line saying a blanket statement like anything recommended by inspector.
Which that is technically incorrect. They have to be, it's too open-ended. They have to
Okay.
be,
It's more specific.
yes.
Okay.
Yes. So yeah, I won't and Leah, I know I saw that you called earlier and I had to jump on another Zoom the other we can
Okay.
talk
I got it together with Joan.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Okay. But yes, that's technically not correct. You
Okay.
need to specify what kind of tests are in there.
Okay.
And then this one, the deadlines for getting this testing contingency done usually mirrors whatever is put into the inspection contingency. So if it's a 10-day inspection contingency, usually it's a 10-day testing contingency as well. All right.
I'd like
Yes.
to add there, if you're the listing agent and you get an offer that is just says any tests recommended by the inspector, counter that for specific tests.
Okay, I'll know for next time. We didn't accept that one, so it's okay.
And then I also want to make a comment with the sanitary system inspections, the well system inspection, and the well water testing. You know, obviously you're only going to include those if those components are a part of the property. So, you know, for those of us working out on the east side, we rarely are including these. I mean, if ever. But those of us who are working more on the west side, Waukesha County, the existence of these systems are more prevalent. So, okay. Abandoned wells. If there is an abandoned well on the property, the seller must provide evidence that it has been properly abandoned. That's an example of a provision that may or may not apply to your transaction, but it's like it's an automatic. So that is a case where we would want to make sure that if there is an abandoned well, seller has to provide that evidence that it's been properly abandoned. And if we didn't use the addendum A, then that would not be a requirement of the seller. So that's why we want to always include an addendum A, or one example of why we would always want to include an addendum A. The shared well agreement, if the well providing drinking water to the property is a private shared well, the seller will provide the buyer with a copy of the shared well agreement. So you'll want to note that would be indicated in usually in MLS. And the agreement will outline how expenses and maintenance are divided amongst the houses. Then lines 65 through 75 map out the right to cure. You guys were introduced to the concept of right to cure at Accelerator. And this is also attached to these contingencies as well. It's a little bit more convoluted when it comes to these contingencies. It's a little bit more straightforward with the inspection and with the appraisal. And we just want you to hear if it comes down to right to cure getting triggered, you just come to talk to Joan or I on it, because it does get a little muddy. So
But I would add too, most of these cures, like drinking water, things like that, are very simple.
yes.
So, that's, you're not really harming the seller by asking for well water, well system to be cured.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like it's so rare that it even gets triggered, right, Joan? I mean, just based off your last comment, it's just like very easy to get all of these things kind of fixed. So I would, unless it's like a completely like failed or like a complete replacement that is needed, I feel like it's pretty rare that deals fall apart on these things. I don't see here. Next, we're going to jump to the VA mortgage. So if there is a VA loan, as a part of your offer, you're going to mark line 100. There are expansions on the financing commitment contingency in the offer as well. I'm not going to go through them all, but that's what this section is for, 79 through 90. As well as expansions on if it's a cash offer. Oh yeah, the mortgage would destroy an insect inspection. So if there's a VA loan, that is going to be required. I don't think that termites are common up here. I know they're not, but they're still going to require an inspection of this. So we would be marking that up as well. Okay, we're going to jump to 182. Rental property ordinances. So the city of Milwaukee requires a registration form and fee of residential rental properties within 15 days of conveyance. So this is for those of you who are working with investors, if they are going to be purchasing duplexes or homes that they intend to be renting out, they must, and this is, sorry, excuse me, the city of Milwaukee only. The city of Milwaukee requires a registration form and fee of the residential rental property within 15 days of the conveyance. So the buyer just needs to be aware of that and to contact the city and the Department of Neighborhood Services. Lead water service line ordinances. So another FYI to the buyer. So the city of Milwaukee requires the property owner to pay for the replacement of privately owned portions of lead water service lines whenever the following occurs, whether it's a leak, when the publicly owned segment of the service line is replaced on a planned or emergency basis. And the city offers special assessment financing if certain circumstances exist. Really what we want you guys to see here, though, is the website where a buyer can learn more about lead water service lines. And yeah, we're going to stop there. The next piece is including additional addenda and indicating it here. So some of you might be in the habit of using the addendum AC already. I feel like this is, I don't know, I feel like half of the offers are using the addendum AC, other half not. But making sure that you indicate it here. If there's an occupancy agreement.
We need to add AC on the addendum A, even if we have it on the original offer as well.
I do. It's arguable that if you have it attached in the offer stage, that it's fine. But there is space for it here, so I just make it a habit. But that's a good question. I would just go ahead and add it here.
Okay.
Other point that I want to make sure that is clear here is lines 206 through 211, or sorry, 213. If you have additional contingencies that a buyer wants to include in the offer to purchase that are, not crash printed in either the offer or the addendum A, you can use this space to write in an additional contingency. So I think I brought this up at a meeting not too long ago as well, but I think the example I used then was a buyer who wanted to see HOA docs prior to writing an offer, but they didn't have them available, but they wanted to get the offer in. So, they made it a contingency to be able to see those HOA docs within a certain amount of days after the accepted offer. So this offer is a contingent upon buyer receiving HOA documents no later than, we'll say, 2 days after accepted offer. You could say here, actually, no later than documents on or before 2 days. Oh, this gives a concrete date. So I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to strike this later. In the event buyer objects to the documents for any reason, I think there'd be a better way to say this, but you guys get the sentiment. Buyer objects to the documents for any reason. Then it continues on line 212. Buyer may, at buyer's option, terminate this offer by written notice delivered to the seller. So this is just an example of what you could use that for.
Yeah, a contingency has to have those three parts. It has to say what it is contingent upon, and then number two, it has to give the time frame no later than, and number three, it has to say what happens if it's not satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
A provision can just be this, this offer is acceptable providing that, but it's not really a contingency. So that's why they have it in two separate areas.
Yeah, the key being, as Joan mentioned, like the roadmap for what happens if it's not delivered or acceptable or, etc. So
you'd say this buyer objects to the documents for any reason. This offer is null and void and all money is returned to the buyer.
Mm-hmm. Then there's another spot for additional provisions. That again, you can, anything that might pertain to the offer, you can use the space for. Then at the bottom, you're gonna put on lines 235 through 241, the name of the firm for the buyer and name of the firm for the seller. Please fill these out completely. This information is needed for the additional parties who are receiving the offer and working on the transaction. So like your title companies, your lender, etc. So make sure that you are completely filling that out. Okay, I'm gonna stop the share for a second. Are there any questions on anything before we move on? Okay. And just to go back to,
Quick one
yes, Leah.
on the provisions and versus the contingency on addendum A. How do we fill that in if we wanted to add more than one contingency?
I would just lift the language and just rewrite it
Okay.
in the additional provisions.
Okay.
Yeah.
When we write something in the additional provisions, can we always add what will happen if we don't get it?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's preferable.
Okay.
Because then it's clear, when it's just like a blanket provision, as Joan was kind of describing before, then it's like,
Yeah.
like one thing I get, one thing we often see, and this is, I don't know, kind of not the greatest example, but it's like, in an offer sometimes a buyer will know up ahead of time that a buyer or a seller is making a repair on the home. Include that, and they include that in the offer to purchase. And they'll say a seller at seller's expense to take care of X, Y, and Z prior to closing. And documentation will be provided no later than X days before closing. And what's missing from that, as Joan again was also saying before, is, well, what's the roadmap if the seller doesn't perform?
Right. Okay.
So then it becomes ambiguous, but then at the same rate, it's kind of, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Joan, but at the same rate, it could be a little much for making that a contingency too, kind of scaring.
A contingency is a higher standard.
Yeah.
It's a way for your buyer to get out of the deal if it isn't satisfied, if it isn't performed, just like financing or inspection is a contingency. Provisions, think of it as this deal will go to closing providing that, and it's usually something a little, like Steph was saying, a little less important, providing that seller repairs what he said he was going to repair. But that's not strong enough to really kick out an offer.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we want to kind of up the priority on it or the importance of it, we'd add the extra language of if we don't get whatever it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it might be like a huge foundation repair or something,
Yeah.
that, like, again, the seller has commented that, work is scheduled, it's going to happen, but, that could be a costly thing if it actually wasn't, if it didn't happen, you know? So, yeah,
Okay.
it's a good case by case where having further discussions with your compliance team. Okay, well, let's get to the addendum S. And I'm gonna actually show you an addendum S through where you're mostly gonna find it as a buyer's agent, where you're gonna pick up the documents that you need to complete an offer to purchase, are usually going to be found in the MLS. So, the typical contracts that you are including in an offer to purchase are, your offer, of course, your addendum A, the addendum F, and the real estate condition report. So the offer and the addendum S, the offer and the addendum A, you're grabbing those from zip forms and filling those out with your buyer. And then the addendum S and the real estate condition report, you're picking those up from MLS, as those are provided by the seller initially for you to complete and include it as a part of the offer. So I'm just going to use one of my listings. So from the data sheet, included in the data in MLS, you'll see the report, the history, the tax information, mortgage information, documents. So here's where the seller and the listing firm, I should say, is going to include the real estate condition report and the lead-based paint addendum. And then any other documents that the listing firm wants to share, the seller wants to share. So in this case, we had an independent inspection report done prior to listing the home, and I've included it here as well. But you'll find all sorts of things here. Seller update lists, maybe paid invoices for work that was already done. I think a good tip here is anything that is found in the document section, whether or not it's like actually included in the offer, like in a real estate condition report or a lead-based paint addendum, I would go ahead and include in the offer to purchase and have the buyer acknowledge that they have received those items with an initial. And that's just also to help protect you, so that you can demonstrate and document that you provided what was available to the buyer at the time of writing the offer.
Yeah, you notice on this list it has listing contract, and this freaks out agents every once in a while. Got the listing contract out there, but you see next to it, it's confidential. Only the listing agent can see that in MLS.
Yes. Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna check mark the documents. I'm gonna pull it up. And from here, you can save this to your, I'm kind of getting into some tech tips here, which is a little bit outside of the training, but you would save this to your desktop and load it into zip forms. That's another training that Lindsay and I do. So stay tuned for that. That's also once a month, and also after an accelerator course has happened. But the real estate condition report. So the real estate condition report, and I don't know if you guys have gone over this in accelerator. I think this is one that you guys are trying to get to. But this is the disclosure report that a seller fills out, indicating any defects that might exist on the property. Joan and I do specific real estate condition report trainings that are available on YouTube. I'm just going to kind of do a high level overview of it again, but there are some ins and outs of this that I'm not going to go through right now. but that is always included in our trainings. It's always in rotation, I should say, and on our YouTube channel, which I know you guys have learned about as well. So, again, this first page, owner's information. So the owner/seller needs to read this to help guide them on how to fill out the real estate condition report. They're going to go through and answer the questions, yes, no, or non-applicable. And if there's a yes answer to any of these questions, then they're going to use the space below to explain or further elaborate on the condition. So a buyer then receives this. They get an understanding, of the defects named. And they will sign it at the base of the very bottom and the buyer's acknowledgement and include this in the offer to purchase. What we would want you to hear about this from the buyer's perspective is that this is not an acceptance of the defects named on a real estate condition report. It's an acknowledgement. So just because a seller has disclosed a condition, it doesn't mean that a buyer does not have the opportunity to further investigate, of course, with through their inspection contingency, or to attempt to negotiate on anything named in a inspection or in a real estate condition report. So they always have that opportunity within the offer to purchase, straight away, or, later on, if, something is learned about a certain condition, then they would have based on what they have learned. So your role as a buyer's agent at this stage when filling out an offer to purchase is, of course, supplying it to the buyer and having them sign here and date here. And then you're going to include it. And then up here, all of these.
What you're sharing is the MLS, not the addendum.
Oh, the real estate condition report hasn't pulled up?
No.
Oh. Thank you for letting me know. I just showed an example. I'm gonna go back here. Euclid record. So you guys were just looking at a screen of the MLS that whole time?
But what you were saying was explanatory enough. Then you start pointing to where you sign your initial.
Yeah, did this pull up? Or now you guys can see this okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the real estate condition report. Again, after these questions, a series of questions for the seller, the seller would mark yes, no, or NA. And then down here is where that buyer is going to sign it and then date it. And I don't think I need to repeat what I just said, but and then there's an addendum, or no, this is specific to this property, but this particular seller included, and this is an example of a document that you would want to make sure that the buyer is also signing if included. But this particular seller expanded on the answers and made it more clear on this addendum. So then I had the buyer also initial this, and it's somewhere up here. And they had a pre-listing inspection done as well, and the seller or the buyer also initialed that. Now to get to the addendum S. Here is the Addendum S. This is also included on any properties listed built prior to 1978. That being said, you're going to find the Addendum S included in properties built after 1978. It's just habit. No harm, no foul to use it and include it. But here on this first page, the seller is acknowledging whether or not they have lead-based paint on the property. 9 times out of 10, you're going to see that the seller has indicated no on line 14 or on line 20. If a seller has not specifically taken samples from their home and sent it off to a lab to get tested, they technically do not have knowledge that there is lead-based paint on the home. So more often than not, you're seeing none and none here. This is a very important document, however. If a seller does have knowledge of lead-based paint on a property, and Joan and I have run into this, and it's not disclosed, that seller can be in some pretty hot water. And if we have knowledge of it and do not disclose, then we would be in hot water as well. So, or could be. So we do need to take this seriously. But the structure of this is, page 1 is for the seller to fill out. The seller is going to sign on line 25 and put their names. It maps out the disclosure requirements for the seller. On page 2, additional language, certification acknowledgement of lead-based paint disclosure. Definitions. And then a space for the listing agent and the buyer's agent to sign on line 119 and 121. So you as a listing agent are going to sign on 119. And then when you pick it up as a buyer's agent and receive it, you are also going to be signing on line 121 as the buyer's agent. Then the third page is for the buyer to include a lead-based paint testing contingency if they wish. They would include that by checking line 131, or they have an opportunity to waive the lead-based paint inspection or assessment. And actually, if they are going to include a lead-based paint testing inspection contingency, they would click on line 131 and 147. If they're going to waive it, they're going to click on line 148. Then the buyer would sign down here. I would say in practice, we're not seeing too much lead-based paint testing actually happening in a offer. That's not to say that it doesn't happen sometimes. Yeah, I guess I don't have experience with a buyer testing for lead-based paint, so I'm not sure what the process is exactly. But further negotiation could happen just like any of these inspection contingency or testing contingency based off of the results, how a buyer would want to negotiate with the seller further. So, presumably you would be getting quotes for removal. But I feel like in the market, generally if it's built before 1978, we're all operating on the fact that there must be lead-based paint buried under layers of paint, right? So that's kind of how we all operate, and a buyer would be, they would just have an understanding that if they were going to remodel, that they would need or want to make steps or take steps with additional removal if found, so just kind of wanted to speak to that.
As you say, if the house is built before 1978, you pretty much assume that there's going to be a layer of lead painted. The most important thing is that you get that pamphlet to the buyer as well. This lead-based paint addendum is attached to the offer. the buyer must see that brochure, taking into effect that the buyer is now reading what the dangers are of dealing with lead-based paint, if they are remodeling or if they have chip paint and things like that. So little children are most susceptible to lead, and the lead can be found in the paint, it can be found in the asbestos, it can be found in varnish on stairwells, railings. So there, it is something that's pretty serious to address, but the brochure is mandatory to be given to the buyer.
Here's what that looks like. And this is just a simple share, you know, you're just gonna share this along with, you know, along with the offer to purchase or ahead of time. But this is that pamphlet. And it, you know, it's on them to read it. So
Is this something that you would just print off and give to them?
I would make a PDF of this and just send it.
Okay.
Yep. All of these forms on let me go back here. All of the forms on zip forms are, you can download them and it makes a PDF of it.
There's the brochure.
So save as a PDF, it'll go into your downloads, and then I could just share that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, any questions, you guys? Again, we just sort of wanted to like pick up from Accelerator where you would incorporate these remaining documents in terms of writing an offer to purchase and including these in an offer to purchase. So any other questions? Okay. Well, we'll